Welcome back to Multiversal Studios. Guys, this is the final breakdown of the Capsule Monsters arc, the finale, which is episode 11 and 12. And is called The True King. So if you haven't already, go check out every single other video breaking down the rest of the episodes, starting with episode number 1. So let's jump right in. So as you guys remember, Yugi and their friends, as well as the evil Dr. Brisbane, use the pendant and fall into the room where the power of a king was promised, which is where they meet Shadi. Now it's actually revealed that Alexander the Great actually passed all 5 trials. So Alexander the Great and his 4 other soldiers completed the pendant just like Yugi did. The only issue was the pendant wouldn't open the door to the room that gives you the power he was craving, which absolutely makes zero sense. Honestly, I hate it. Each trial Yugi and his friends completed tested a different area to judge your heart and see if they did the right thing. Now after all of that, and you pass each trial, and the door decides that you're still not worthy, then what's the point of having the trials in the first place? Everyone should just receive a pendant and let the door decide who's actually worthy. I actually feel bad for Alexander, if I'm honest, because it was just a waste of time. Now as the doors wouldn't open up for Alexander the Great, which meant they failed the test, and his followers had their souls taken and trapped in the pyramids, while Alexander's soul, which had been torn in two by the ring, his good side was locked in the Capsule Monsters game, and the evil side was locked in the pyramid, until his descendant, Dr. Alex Brisbane, walked into the pyramid and his body was taken over. Now what I find strange is, they actually explain what occurred afterwards. Do you remember how in the last episode, I thought that the evil Dr. Brisbane, controlled by the spirit, organized Joey winning the raffle and the plane crashing in this part of the world? Well, actually it turns out none of that was him. The true answer was, guys, it was fate all along.
So all that stuff happened by coincidence?
No, these events were guided by the hands of fate.
You gotta be out of your turban, bro!
That's right, fate was the reason that Joey won the raffle. Fate was also the reason they were all free to come to India in those days, and fate was also the reason that the plane crashed in that part of India. So there we have it, guys. If you ever have any mysteries that need to be solved in Yu-Gi-Oh, well, the answer is fate. Problem solved. So Dr. Alex Brisbane's solution was getting Yugi and his friends to complete the challenges for him, and then steal their pendant to open the door. However, Shadi, who ruled over the test, decided that there should be one final game between Yugi and his friends and Alexander the Great. I'm not too sure why, since Alexander had clearly failed the test by the door centuries ago. So the final game was an all-out Capsule Monsters war between Alexander the Great and the souls of the warriors who had followed him, and Yugi and his friends. So it's a pretty simple concept. Now Yugi brings out the classic speech about how he needs to do this alone.
Wait! I need to do this alone, guys! I'm not going to put you in any more danger than I already have!
By the way, guys, in 12 episodes, this is the 3rd time he's used this speech. At this point, I would just be like, fine, do it alone. But this also makes no sense, because early on in the series, it's actually Yugi that convinces Atem that they needed friendship to succeed, and that they need to do it together.
Don't even think of trying this alone!
But Yugi,
We need to work as a team!
it's too...
Trust me! We all have to work together!
You're right. It's the only way.
It's like they forgot each time a new enemy comes along. Now they all release every single capsule monster for the all-out war. Now it's really interesting to see what the opposing team has as monsters. So let's start with Alexander's soldiers number 1, as none of these guys were actually given any names in the anime for some weird reason. So soldier number 1 had Garma Sword, Makura the Destructor, Dark Geroid, and Lekunga. I'm sensing a bit of Marek's energy in these cards. Now soldier number 2 had Total Defense Shogun, Manticore of Darkness, and the Big Tusked Mammoth. Soldier number 3 had Reflect Bounder and Succubus Knight. Soldier number 4 had the Fire Winged Pegasus and Stealth Bird. And last, Alexander the Great had Reshef the Dark Being, which is the only monster he summoned at the time, which is insane because Reshef is so huge. Now as Yugi fuses with his strongest monster, which is the Blackluster Soldier, Alexander the Great merges with Reshef. Now the action scenes between Yugi and his friends versus the nameless soldiers who worked for Alexander the Great was actually quite entertaining. It wasn't what you'd expect. I thought it'd be mindless clashes with no real strategy. However, I was wrong. We had multiple scenes where Taya and Tristan and even Grandpa were outsmarting the opposing team in sneaky maneuvers, not relying on just strength, but also intellect. However, it becomes abundantly clear that Alexander's side is losing. But as classic evil guys tend to be, Alexander doesn't care about them at all. And he actually ends up sacrificing all of his soldiers in order to use a different capsule monster he hadn't shown before, which actually turned out to be the 7-armed fiend. Do you guys remember this monster? This monster was actually foreshadowed in episode 1. It was the creature from Yugi's nightmares, and every time we saw it, we saw Atem losing to this creature. Now I have to say, this monster does open up a few questions, if I'm being honest. Where did Alexander the Great get a creature like this? Now we see it as a normal capsule, so this must have been unlocked ordinarily, like a normal capsule. But this also had a special summoning condition, which required 4 sacrifices, human ones, which is a completely new concept, up until now. I've always thought that stronger monsters just meant they have a longer cooldown time. Now what I find odd is, the 7-armed fiend is so OP, even Grandpa says.
Well, in the board game, it's practically indestructible.
Are you telling me Alexander the Great just got incredibly lucky with his capsules? Like whilst everyone else is receiving Thunder Kid or Happy Lover, Alexander the Great received Reshef and the 7-armed fiend, which seems a little suspicious. Also, how did this capsule monster enter Yugi's dream and also affect the Millennium Puzzle in the way it did? I know it's powerful, but surely it's still a normal monster, right? Well, since we have another question that we don't receive an answer to, we'll just pop it down to fate. Now it's revealed that each of the 7-armed fiend's arms has a special ability, so that's a total of 7 abilities, which is just insane. Also, I can't seem to find a Yu-Gi-Oh card for the 7-armed fiend, so I assume it's just created for this series alone. Now the first arm is called the Arm of the Skulls, which is basically an ability which spawns Skull Knight number 2. So basically, the 7-armed fiend, which is a capsule monster, has an ability to spawn other capsule monsters and a lot of them as well. Now the second arm is called Arm of Regeneration, so it can just heal the Skull Knights when they are hurt. Now we have 5 other arms to go. Now the third arm is called Arm of Entrapment, which basically summons a portal, and the 7-armed fiend can summon multiple arms to stop you in your tracks. The fourth arm is called Arm of Defense, which can literally block any attack. The fifth arm, revealed to us, is called Arm of Destruction, and you can basically guess what that arm does. It destroys things. The sixth arm is called Arm of Clairvoyance, which actually allows the fiend to read Yugi's mind, which is just wild. It's very similar to the ability Pegasus has with his Millennium Eye in Duelist Kingdom. Now we never actually find out the ability of the 7th arm, but even so, this has to be one of the most broken monsters ever to exist. Like, even the ability to read your mind is pretty much impossible to defeat. Now the creature uses the Arm of Destruction to target Grandpa Moto, and honestly I was rooting for the fiend on that attack. However, unfortunately, all the weaker monsters owned by Taya, Tristan and Joey protected Grandpa. Now I thought the way they could defeat this creature would be how they defeated Pegasus in Duelist Kingdom, since they already had experience against someone who could read their minds, which was called the Mind Shuffle, which is where Yugi and Atem would switch their bodies, keeping their thoughts away from each other, so when their mind is read, it doesn't contain the strategy the other one came up with. However, since this is a physical combat zone, it kinda doesn't work, as Atem is the athletic one, and constantly switching bodies in battle seems illogical. Now instead what they do is, Atem links his thoughts with the Millennium Puzzle, so when Alexander the Great tries to read his mind using the 7-armed fiend, he traps Alexander's mind in the Millennium Puzzle. And as we know, Atem doesn't have his memories, so the Millennium Puzzle is just a maze. And whilst Alexander the Great is trapped inside, Atem is able to defeat the 7-armed fiend, which is actually a genius strategy. Now what I don't understand is, why didn't they try this strat on Pegasus? It seems way more effective. Now with the fiend defeated, I was under the impression that the main bad guy was gone, since the fiend was the one who was foreshadowed, and Yugi had multiple nightmares about that one one creature. However, that wasn't the case, as Reshef was left. So why didn't they foreshadow Reshef instead? I feel like all the build up and hype of this one fiend, but now that it's defeated, it feels like the end, and introducing Reshef as the main bad guy seems a little strange. However, when the fiend was defeated, the 4 soldiers who were sacrificed all came back with their capsule monsters, so it's only a temporary sacrifice. Now this is actually the part where the episode ends and the second one begins. Now you have to admit, even those soldiers who weren't named, you got to admire their loyalty. They were just sacrificed to summon the 7-armed fiend, and as soon as they came back from not being sacrificed, they immediately followed Alexander the Great's orders and began their assault on Yugi and his friends. Now, since the 7-armed fiend had done a lot of damage and taken a lot of energy from Yugi and his friends, this time around, when they went head to head with Alexander the Great's soldiers, they began to lose. Now Yugi attempted to get close to Reshef of Destruction, as from first glance it looks like it's undefended. However, it actually had a built-in laser system called the Omnidirectional Laser Assault. Now these lasers had no direction, so it threatened everyone, including Alexander's own people, yet again showing no regard for them. Now Atem finds a blind spot in the armor, which was attacking from underneath. Now I have to say, there's a scene where Yugi is getting carried by the Magician of Black Chaos in order to get close enough to Reshef to attack. However, following him behind is a Celtic Guardian, but the Celtic Guardian can't fly, so it just looks like Celtic Guardian is just jumping from laser to laser, which is just impossible. Now when Yugi successfully makes his attack against Alexander the Great, Alexander yet again changes strategies, and he actually absorbs all the monsters his soldiers own in order to form 3 energy orbs, boosting the strength of Reshef, however leaving his own soldiers defenseless. I think they're really trying to push the parallels between Atem and Alexander, where one cares about his men and the other has no regard for them. Now those 3 energy balls are actually already on display on the Yu-Gi-Oh card, so that's a pretty nice touch to show how those orbs actually got to be a part of Reshef in the first place. Now when Alexander attacks with Reshef, any damage taken from the monster is actually relayed back to his men, meaning Alexander no longer takes any damage from Yugi's attacks, using his own soldiers as a human shield. Now Alexander, using his new and powerful Reshef, takes down all of Yugi's friends. So Atem uses every single one of his capsule monsters, including the Black Luster soldier he fused with, in order to protect them, which again is a massive parallel to Alexander. Alexander took all the power for himself, whilst Yugi shared his power with his friends, which is probably why the door rejected Alexander in the first place. Now as Yugi was now defenseless and focused on the safety of his friends, Alexander attacks him with a massive energy beam, and this unlocks the true power of the armor, as every single one of his friends' monsters fuse with Yugi. So that's Thunder Dragon, Red Eyes Black Dragon, Seirairu, and the Curse of Dragon. Now I think this armor would have been awesome, but they ruined the look by adding a red aura which just hides most of the armor. The armor's name was the Armor of Unity, which can only be unlocked by having a strong bond with your friends. Now we knew this friendship thing was coming, however they did it in an epic way, but I really wish they got rid of the red aura. It really takes away from the final scene where he defeats Reshef. It should have been similar to how it was when he fused with the Blue Eyes armor. That was clean and you could see every detail on the armor clearly. Now with the final attack, Yugi defeated Alexander the Great, and the pharaoh had proven that he was the true king. Now with the game over, Shadi offers Atem a mysterious orb which is meant to be the power to be able to rule the entire world. Now I wonder what this power actually consisted of. However, we'll never know as Yugi refuses. This also allowed the souls of Alexander and his men to be finally released and in peace. And we even get a shot of Atem and Alexander the Great as pharaohs, as Alexander the Great also ruled Egypt at one point in history, which again was just an epic scene. Now after the test was over, the pyramid disappeared as Shadi's shadow game was finally over, but we do get the answer to one of the questions we had, that time did stop as they entered the game. So those 3 to 4 days they were probably gone in the game. No time actually passed in the real world. Now Yugi, Joey, Taya, Tristan, Grandpa Moto and Dr. Alex Brisbane all fly off into the sunset, The moral of the story being to treat others with respect, since that's what ultimately got Yugi the win against Alexander. And that is the end of this episode and this series. Now I have to say guys, this series, the Capsule Monster arc, was quite gimmicky at parts. However, personally, I really enjoyed this series, and I hope I managed to convince a few of you guys to give this arc a try and even enjoy it. Well guys, let me know if you enjoyed this series in the comments down below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Until next time guys.